Mom, let's not argue about this. You know that the apartment you're renting belongs to me. I want to move back home and live my independent life. I'm already 18, and I don't want to live with you and your second husband anymore. I tried not to raise my voice in our conversation, but you stubbornly refused to hear me out. I vaguely remember my father. He passed away when I was very young. What I remember most are his hands, which always held me tightly when we met. Mom, you always complained that Dad loved me more than you. After Dad's funeral, it was just you and me left in the two-bedroom apartment. I did my best to help you at home, just to keep you from being upset. Several months passed, and one day a tall, unfamiliar man appeared at our apartment door. Lenica, meet your new dad, you said with excitement in your voice. Call me Uncle Vova. The man approached me with a condescending look and said, I hope you'll be an obedient girl, and your mom won't have to be disappointed with your behavior. Uncle Vova took off his coat, hung it in the hallway, and followed me to the kitchen. From that moment on, he never showed any interest in me. I looked at my mom in bewilderment, trying to understand what was happening. However, she quickly averted her gaze, busied herself, and hurried into the kitchen. Following Uncle Vova, from the kitchen, I could immediately hear the clattering of dishes. Uncle Vova started living with us in our apartment despite my mom's efforts. I never found common ground with him. He was never interested in what was happening with me, whether I needed help or if someone was bothering me. Once, I complained to him that some boys from our neighborhood were not letting me use the swings. Uncle Vova reacted coldly, saying, Go to your mother, let her handle it. After hearing his response, I realized it was my first and last request for help directed at Uncle Vova. Occasionally, my paternal grandmother would take me to visit her. I would discuss all my childhood problems with her, and she always provided understanding and support. 2 years passed, and my mom and Uncle Vova welcomed a daughter, Vika. During that period, my mom became even more distant from me, completely absorbed in caring for the baby. Although she was only 10 years older than me, I had never felt so lonely before. My mom was occupied all the time, and my rare attempts to get her attention went unnoticed. She always responded with, Can't you see I am busy with Vika? You should have helped me instead of bothering me. I began to spend more and more time with my grandmother, especially Grandma. She taught me how to cook, always helped with my homework, as she had been a school teacher until retirement. With Grandma, there was always time to listen to me and soothe my fears. Life is a complex thing. Remember one thing, we reap what we sow. Grandma replied cryptically to my question about why Mom loved Vika and not me. 6 months later, I moved in with Grandma permanently. It will be better for everyone, and it will be easier for you, while I have a little child on my hands. You can watch over her and do your homework without being distracted by a crying baby. My mother cheerfully explained the advantages of moving in with Grandma. I was even glad to move because I felt like a stranger and unwanted in my mother's house. The next few years were the happiest in my life. Grandma loved showing me our hometown as she remembered it from her childhood. As long as she had the strength, we visited the city's historical landmarks and its surroundings. My mother visited us rarely, often excusing herself with a lack of free time. She provided financial support for me sparingly. Most of the time, we lived on Grandma's pension and assistance due to the loss of my father. Uncle Vova never came to visit. Not once, much to my relief. Time flew by. I began to notice that Grandma's health was deteriorating. We no longer went out of town together because Grandma lacked the strength. One day, she gathered her strength and asked me to accompany her. We went to the notary's office where Grandma made a will in my name, her granddaughter. Listen, after my son, your father, passed away, I have no close relatives left except for you. I bequeath the apartment where we live to you, my dear. My soul will rest easy knowing that you have a place where you can live independently and won't depend on anyone. Grandma said. A month later, Grandma became bedridden, and all the caregiving responsibilities fell on my shoulders. When my mother found out about Grandma leaving me the apartment, she simply said, I didn't expect that the old lady would do such a thing. What apartment? You're only 16. I thought the old lady would put it in my name, and I would be able to handle it. If she wants help with caregiving, then we'll see. I didn't even bother passing my mother's words on to Grandma to avoid upsetting her unnecessarily. For the next 3 months, I had to juggle school, then rush home to take care of Grandma, prepare meals, do the laundry, and tidy up the apartment. I could only start my homework late in the evening. The organization of the funeral also fell on my shoulders, but thankfully, the neighbors provided guidance and assistance. When it was all over, I found myself alone in the apartment. Finally, I let my tears flow freely. The next morning, my mother appeared at the doorstep. "You're still in your pajamas, get ready. Let's go and finalize the paperwork for the will, and while we're at it, you'll also create a general power of attorney in my name. Come on, hurry up," my mother urged me. I struggled to get up and began to get dressed. At the notary's office, we quickly processed all the documents related to the will. But one question continued to nag at me. "Could you please explain why a general power of attorney is being arranged?" I asked the notary with my mother present. The notary looked at my mother with surprise and explained that a power of attorney gives someone the right to manage my property. "Why do you need this power of attorney from me? What do you plan to do with it?" I asked my mother. She hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Let it be. Maybe it will come in handy. I might need to sell Grandma's apartment. You won't have time for that with school and all. Having this power of attorney would allow me to assist you. But I have no intention of selling my apartment," I insisted, "so there's no need to arrange a power of attorney. We won't just sit idly by either," my mother retorted, speaking in a hushed tone. "What don't you understand?" She added in a whisper, "Mom, you can come live with us. Why do you need to live separately? You're not even 18 yet. We can sell Grandma's apartment and use the money to exchange our 2-bedroom apartment for a 3-bedroom one, and you'll have your own space there." My mother continued trying to convince me for a while longer, but before she could make any more arguments, the notary interjected, "Well, will we arrange the power of attorney or not? Please decide soon." "No, we won't," I replied firmly. "I won't entrust my property to anyone. Thank you." I collected my documents and left the office. My mother caught up to me on the way out. "How do you plan to live alone in that apartment? Where will you get the money to support yourself?" "You're still in school," she said, holding onto my hand. "Let's talk. I won't sell the apartment, that matter is settled. But the permission to live independently, I understand you won't grant it until I turn 18, correct?" I clarified. "Of course, I won't. I worry about you. Besides, we don't have any extra money, especially since Vova is not here to help. So, whether you like it or not, you'll have to live with us for now. We'll rent out the apartment to support you, and we'll see how it goes," my mother replied. I reluctantly agreed to the move. In our apartment, my mother allocated a corner in the kitchen where I did my homework, and that's also where I slept for the remaining year and a half until I turned 18. I tried to stay as far away from my newly formed family as possible. I did my school work in the library during evenings, took on part-time work, and spent most weekends at friends' houses. The few hours I did spend at home were dominated by my mother's persistent demands for me to sell the apartment and hand over the money. "Aren't you my own daughter? Don't you understand that it's your duty to help me? Can't you see that our 2-bedroom apartment is getting cramped and your sister is growing up? You should take care of your family," my mother said, growing increasingly frustrated. Feeling the pressure as time ran out, my mother's tone grew harsher. She no longer held back with her words. "We're spending money on you: food, clothing, utilities. You benefit from all of this. But who pays for it?" "We do, Vova and I," she said. Despite her tough talk, I remained steadfast in my decision. "Don't be so stubborn. I buy my own clothes with my earnings. Everything else, you get money from renting my apartment. I've never seen any of that money. You take it all, so I don't owe you anything. As soon as I turn 18, I'll move out and live on my own," I responded, not backing down. My 18th birthday arrived amid this tense atmosphere. I asked my mother to inform the tenant that the apartment would no longer be available for rent, and I was moving in. My mother reluctantly replied that there was still 6 months left on the lease, and we would have to wait. I had made a mistake. There was indeed 1 more month left on the lease, so I would have to wait for a while. My mother then provided a seemingly childish reason why she couldn't terminate the lease earlier. I understood that my mother had grown accustomed to receiving rent money from the apartment and didn't want to part with it. I needed to take matters into my own hands. I returned home and informed the tenants that the apartment would no longer be available for rent. They agreed to move out in 4 days, just in time before the next month's rent was due. As I began packing my belongings, my mother noticed my suitcase and asked where I was going. "I'm moving out and getting out of your way. Thanks for your hospitality," I replied. My mother was taken aback and accused me of being ungrateful. "What an ungrateful daughter you are. I gave birth to you and raised you, and this is how you repay me. Whose sleepless nights were these?" she exclaimed. "And instead of thanking your own mother for it, you only think about your own well-being." She tried to make me feel guilty. "Mom, I'll remind you that it was my grandmother who raised me, and I'm very grateful for that. Do you remember how often you visited me when I lived with her? You didn't even come to my birthdays. So there's nothing for me to thank you for," I responded, holding my ground. I picked up my suitcase and headed for the front door. Then I added another point. "Oh, and one more thing, I consulted with someone, and you know what? Mom, I have a share of this apartment as part of my inheritance from my father. So don't think I'll just leave it behind so easily." There was silence. I turned around and my mother stood there. Clearly thunderstruck, she hadn't even considered this turn of events. I quietly closed the front door behind me. Indeed, my grandmother was right when she said, "We reap what we sow." Now I understand the true meaning of that phrase.